Good morning, everyone. I want to follow up on Andrew's comments, congratulating CenterState staff in terms of putting together a wonderful event every year. This is one of the most professionally done events I do throughout the course of any year that I'm speaking. But I also want to thank all of you for coming out year after year to be part of this story that we want to kick the year off with in terms of understanding where we're at, trying to use that to help make better decisions and drive the region forward. I think leadership is so critical to that, and we can delegate that to our organizations like CenterState, which has a great capacity for that leadership. But it starts with each and every one of you. And so thank you so much for being part of that today. What I'd like to do today is give you some sense of what I'm looking at for the year ahead. I think to start with that, though, we have to really focus on sort of the old proverb, may you live in interesting times. And we certainly ended last year with some, I think, unexpected results at quite a level that will shape the 2017 and beyond economy. We're not quite sure yet what this will be, but it's manifested by that level of unease about the course the country was on. Perhaps the election results may not have been as much a surprise if you had seen the report put out by the Harvard Business School in September that talked to the aspects of the U.S. economy that were really holding us back from getting our progress to a greater extent than we had seen. We've been growing at the terrible 2% type range for far too long. The biggest impediment that was identified was the man-made aspects of not having a functioning, I think, leadership in Washington and beyond. So the election results, in my opinion, were a referendum on some of that. We'll have to see where we go with a new administration, a new way of doing things, but that will be a big part of the 2017 story for sure. Now, one aspect of how the business community has reacted, we've seen the increases in the stock market, et cetera, but this was a fascinating set of results from the National Federation of Independent Business, perhaps the oldest business advocacy group for small business in the country. Their survey results show the optimism of smaller firms towards what the future lies being a big, big improvement from where we are at. In fact, the December results that came out yesterday were the biggest one-month increase in 30 years for this survey. There is a sense that businesses are going to be allowed to be businesses to a greater extent in this new administration in the future. We'll have to see how that plays out, but I think that business optimism has to be factored into how we look at 2017 in terms of the animal spirits that may be generated a bit more than what we've seen so far. Let's stay tuned to this story. Let's keep our fingers crossed that this optimism translates into activity as we go to the year ahead. Now, the economics profession, my world, really isn't ready yet to sort of get on that optimism bandwagon in terms of the 2017 outlook. The economy is a big tiger, and to grab it by the tail and think that you can make a meaningful change right off the bat is something that we'll have to see. There are parts of the U.S. economy that have been underperforming for a long time, and we'll have to watch that as the year plays out. Certainly the international trade story, certainly the investment story that has been one that has held back the U.S. economy, still has to, I think, be fully addressed by the new administration going forward. So for the time being, the consensus is some improvement, probably more towards the second half of the year as we get a little more clarity, a little more policy rolled out, and into 2018 with a tailwind in terms of some of the things in front of us And to give you a sense of that, I'm going to finish with 3 U.S. trends that I think are very important to that story. One that will continue to provide optimism to me going forward is this slide. At the national level, the help wanted signs remain out. The biggest part of the U.S. economy is consumer spending, and consumer spending is a factor of having a job, having a paycheck, spending that paycheck. 70% of total economic activity comes from that. The fact that employers want to bring more people online to a greater extent than we've seen in a number of years. You really have to go back a decade or so to see this level of job openings in the country is a positive to me. Whether we have the skills and the people to fill these jobs is now the story as we get closer and closer to full employment. And the emphasis on training, skill sets, workforce development is spot on. We really have to focus on that going forward. But the first condition, the demand for labor, remains high. Another element is the supply of labor. The labor that we need to go forward in this country has been sort of on the sidelines, if you will, for a number of years. We're starting to see that turn, which is very positive. We can't just rely on a smaller and smaller base of individuals to provide the economic activity in this country. We need to have everyone participate. We are seeing some growth here. Hopefully this will continue as we get into, again, a more full employment environment with some tailwind behind us. But this condition is setting us up for a good entry into 2017 as well. And finally, the most important element of a tailwind and directional momentum, I think, at the national level can be seen here. I think some of that angst that the country felt, some of the disgruntlement, really came from the fact that for many years of this recovery, we've lived with less than we had. The income levels of the typical U.S. household had not been moving forward. Well, the last 2 years now, we've started to see that gap close between where we once were. And again, that is self-fulfilling as these incomes get redistributed through the economy. So all in all, heading into 2017, a lot of uncertainty, a lot yet to sort of figure out in terms of the policies that we'll be seeing, the changes at the macro level. But I'm optimistic that we have some certainly good momentum heading into 2017. That brings us to our region. You know, I'm often asked as I come into a room and see friends that I've met with at prior meetings, do you have good news for us today? I usually do, and I do today as well in certain cases, but I won't be shy in saying that if you were here last year and saw my presentation, it'll be a lot of similar trends to that today. Frankly, this region has some room to grow, and we want to make sure that we're talking to that story as we get into the latter part of my deck and into Rob's and beyond's aspect of today. But let's start off with what 2016 looked like. It did look a little better, but you have to have really sharp eyes to see the upturn in total output in 2016. The big picture is what it was and has been for several years now. This region is growing, but it is not keeping pace with the rest of the country. I don't think that's that surprising to all of us in the room. The fact that we did well during the downturn seems like it was quite a while ago now, but what do we do in terms of driving total output, driving activity and wealth through the region higher? That is the story in front of us. We continue to see the same conditions this year as we saw in the last year's presentation. Now, this may be something you think is sort of a story that translates across all of upstate New York, but I want to give you, I think, an evolution that's occurring in upstate New York as a benchmark to the region's performance. We really are not seeing one size fits all when it comes to economic performance in upstate New York like we once did. We're seeing a bifurcation, if you will, of those that are engaged in a way that is driving their economy forward. successfully and those that still have work to do. And the areas that are moving in a more positive fashion, as you can see here, the eastern and western portions of upstate have kept very strong pace with U.S. recovery over the course of the period since 2007 and are making a difference in terms of turning a bit of a corner. It's up to this region and, frankly, all of the central part of upstate really to start to look to that model, look to those lessons, and take some of that as what can we do to engage in this. I don't think it's a fait accompli that all parts of our region have to be behind that U.S. norm. We've seen some really good examples here. Now, a lot was discussed throughout the election cycle in terms of the manufacturing world, and with some emphasis here on central New York by President-elect Trump. There's no question that this region has seen some decline in its industrial base. That shouldn't be a surprise, again, to any of us, and you can see that the drag that it's created relative to the typical U.S. metropolitan area. The good news is that that seems to have stabilized a bit, and we are getting closer to pulling our head back to the waterline on this regard. But frankly, as a long-term expectation, this isn't going to be something that probably lifts the boat to the degree that we once experienced. What is the bigger story, though, beyond that industrial decline, is the lack of progress we're seeing in industries outside of manufacturing. This is the broadest base of the economy when you think about it. The industrial world comprises about 20% at most of the regional economy. The other 80% is embodied in these numbers. This is the area that really has to be looked at for how can we energize activity, how can we diversify, how can we become a broader based economy in order to capture some of that U.S. momentum. And frankly, again, in the past year, we moved a bit sideways relative to the U.S. progress. I like to focus on what I call the economy 2.0 industries. Those are the new economy bases for much of the country. High-end services, education, healthcare, business services, finance, construction, real estate, tourism, hospitality. Those are areas that are broadening the base of the U.S. economy. They're broadening the base of those areas of upstate that are proceeding ahead of us. And how do we benchmark our performance against that? Well, you can see we have some room to grow in a number of these areas. We've made some solid progress on the what I call the tourism type things, retail, leisure, hospitality, and I think Destiny USA is a big function of this performance. We've actually exceeded the typical U.S. metropolitan area. But again, a host of other areas we tend to be behind in terms of the support to our economy that they have provided. The two biggies here that we really have to look at, eds and meds, education and healthcare, something that we are very good at here in central New York. How can we energize that like our peers in other parts of upstate to move forward? And construction, real estate development. I think we're making progress in terms of that as well. We're at the very early stages, I think, of starting to move forward in some really good projects, particularly around the waterfront, which, knowing from my hometown, Buffalo, how much that meant to us in terms of psychological lift, I am encouraged by here. But again, not quite the same level as we've seen in other parts of upstate New York. The bottom line then is if we don't engage these sectors in terms of broadening our base, in terms of energizing activity there, we're going to continue to get the results that we've seen. You can compare the job growth here in those particular sectors versus just the U.S. number for sure, but certainly Buffalo. The Buffalo rebound is a bit of a marketing aspect to it. Sometimes I think we pat ourselves a little too much on the back about how we're turning around there. But there's no question that there's been results that would be envious to a number of parts of upstate New York in terms of creating those new opportunities. This is the path that central New York has to go down, I believe, to get with the growth that is around us in terms of just regionally, but also nationally. Now, we look at probably the biggest economic indicator that comes out regularly and say, well, we're making progress, aren't we? The unemployment numbers certainly suggest that the regional growth is continuing, and it has been, but clearly, I think there's some limitations in looking at certainly just the unemployment number. Yes, we're getting closer to where we once were, the full employment number of before the Great Recession, not that far off the U.S. number, but the big picture when it comes to unemployment isn't really the unemployment rate, but this aspect of what's happening regionally, the labor force. We have to have enough employees to meet employer demand going forward. Andrew talked about it in terms of one of the big priorities for the coming year. There's no question that we have to make some progress in terms of turning this set of numbers. Now, there's some demographic component to this that is going to be difficult to overcome, but training and retraining, allowing employees and potential workers to gain new skills and match them up with employers is going to be a big part of turning the spigot, if you will, higher in terms of economic activity locally. Now, I do have, I think, a positive element to that story that should give us some hope that we are going to have some better times in terms of labor force. I was gratified to see when I crunched these numbers that we are seeing an uptick in our millennial generation, a very important part of our future workforce. The folks that are going to have to take up the mantle of going forward as older workers retire, as those with skill set mismatches have problems translating into new opportunities. This is going to be the future. And to see that we are gaining some younger individuals that have some education skill set that is more in tune with what labor demand is going to be very important. How we keep these individuals, how we continue to build on this trend is up to all of us in terms of future policy and aspects of driving the economy forward. But at least in this particular set, I think we do have a bit of a tailwind in terms of labor force issues. Which brings me to my wrap-up. And as we segue into what I'm sure Rob will tell us has been a big part of the past year, but more importantly, the future. How do we continue to move forward and get those numbers that we just looked at to be more like some of our compatriots around upstate New York, or driving them more towards the national mean? I think we have to continue to try and change who we are, continue to work our plan in terms of the regional councils, in terms of leveraging that upstate initiative dollar to help change us. If we expect to change our economic fortunes by doing the same things we've done in the past, we're not going to achieve the results we really want. We have to sprinkle in new sectors of the economy to diversify into, to broaden our base, to capture the future growth potential that we have seen here in central New York play out over 100 years plus in terms of the innovative type companies and industries that have supported us in the past. You can't just build those from scratch. You have to keep working and working and working to do that. And I'm hopeful that the planning process that we are on, which has got some really good, I think, future potential, continues to play out if we support it, if we try to make that change happen and deliver the future that we really want to have for this region. I want to finish with two last slides that do have more of an upbeat tone and give us some sense that we're on the right path. The bottom line for economic activity is how much each and every one of us have at our disposal to live the lives we want to have. Personal income, at the end of the day, is the end result of economic activity. And in this regard, the most recent data that came out from the federal scorekeepers in Washington on this does give us some positive hope that we are starting to see the early signs of change in our activity. The per capita personal income growth in 2015 certainly is encouraging when you look at where we've come from and some of the challenges we face. We have to keep this trend going. I think we can because, again, the most recent data we have from New York State in terms of payroll income supports that kind of a trend line. Through mid-2016 for sure, but this is an impressive increase in terms of the total payroll income throughout the 12-county region on an inflation-adjusted basis. Something is happening. Something is starting to change. We need to keep nurturing that change. We need to keep supporting that. And I think that will be a part of everyone, again, in the room, part of our leadership, part of our everyday life in terms of making sure we're doing the right things to move forward, collaborating, working together to make the changes that we need to drive the progress that we want to get to. With that, I think I will leave it in your hands going forward. I wish you all the best of luck in 2017. It will be somewhat turbulent, I think, at the beginning of the year, so buckle up a little bit. But a year from now, we'll have greater clarity. I think we'll have another year of progress, and we're on our way in terms of that. Follow the path we're on. Keep working hard. It's necessary that we change some of the things that support our economic growth. Thank you very much.